I think one of the most useful things I have is a country report from the 2009 International Narcotics Control Strategy report on Afghanistan. And Mr. Braun, I'd like to ask you the same thing I asked Ambassador Holbrooke. This report contains that Nangarhar province alone shifted from having the second highest rate of poppy production in the country in '07 to achieving poppy-free status in 2008. I asked what this was attributable to, and he said a determined governor and an agricultural replacement program, essentially. Do you see this as any kind of a prototype which should be continued in other southern provinces, or do you see the fact that Nangarhar is a rich soil province, making it exceptional and therefore not applying to other provinces?
There's probably going to be some disagreement from my co-panelists on this, but I happen to agree with Mr. Holbrooke on this one. Not only was the governor responsible, a determined governor. I would say that there's a little tough love that goes into what happened in Nangarhar province also.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, the governor laid down some very stiff guidelines. He banned poppy eradication, poppy production. There was forced eradication. There were a lot of things that he did that literally turned the situation around in record time. Whether there was, some negative or negativity as a result of that from the populace or not, I'm not so sure. Some say yes. I've talked to many that say no. The reality of the situation is that the vast majority of the production is now clearly centered in the southern part of the country. And just 2 or 3 years ago, virtually every province in the country, we saw poppy production. So there's been a great deal to turn things around. My point center that I would say about this is when you look at where the vast majority of the production is now taking place in southern Afghanistan, that is where we see the largest pockets and masses of the Taliban, which I believe clearly supports what my point was in my opening statement. We're seeing this convergence of drugs and terrorism on the part of the Taliban. They're not just taxing farmers any longer. And by the way, that is the oldest form of organized criminal extortion on the face of the earth. It's been going on for a long, long time. But that's just like the FARC. That's where they got their start. They started taxing farmers. Then they began forming alliances and relationships with the traditional traffickers. In the private sector in the past year, Senator, I've learned that that's called outsourcing, okay? From there, they began to realize how much more money that they could make on the trade, and they began muscling their way in. And they've certainly got the training and the arms and that kind of thing to do that, to muscle in on the traditional traffickers' activities. But that's what's happening, and I see quite frankly in my eyes, I think we've got an opportunity here. I think most of the trouble is in the South, and if the president chooses to send an additional 40,000 troops into the country, I think a lot of them will probably be down in that area, and we're going to be much better positioned to take the fight to the bad guys.
Thank you very much. Ms. McDonald, have you worked at, actually, the manufacturing of some poppy for morphine in a very controlled way, seems to me would make some sense. It would have to be a strictly government-regulated industry. My question would be to you, does Afghanistan have the ability to maintain a corrupt-free, highly regulated industry to produce this medical morphine?
It's an important question that we've been working on protocols now for several years, and we've looked at the Indian model. As I said, the United States supported a conversion of growing opium for heroin to morphine in Turkey and India, and the United States has a preferential trade agreement to buy the morphine product. We have developed a protocol that, as I said, we'd like to test, that is based on the Indian model plus some adjustments for Afghanistan. It's true, of course, we know there's no strong federal government in Afghanistan, but there's very strong local control, which is why we want to attempt this village shura control. We borrowed something from microfinance, which is the co-guarantee system. So a village would receive a license for cultivation of a certain amount of land, which we know would produce a certain number of kgs. If one of the farmers doesn't deliver, allows his opium to go into the trafficking networks, the entire village loses its license. So we have we've taken existing models, we've tried to look at the control systems that actually exist in Afghanistan, and that's what we'd like to test. Of course, we don't know whether it be successful, which is why we're calling for pilot projects and an expert group. The governor of Kandahar is willing to allow us to run pilot projects there, to try and see exactly how that plays itself out. India does have some leakage, maybe 20%, but we think if we could get Afghanistan down to 20% of its current production as opposed to 100%, that would be a worthwhile effort. We see it as part of a diversification plan to bridge a period of time until alternative livelihoods, which, as I'm sure you know very well, are going to take some years to kick in. And if there does become a diversified economy in southern Afghanistan, then the government could choose to discontinue its licensed morphine product.
Thank you. Let me just quickly go back to Mr. Braun. I'd like to ask the same question I asked of Ms. McDonald to you. I believe the Taliban is on a rise. I agree with what you're saying. I believe it is fueled by the drug trade. To what degree, I don't know, but I think a considerable amount. So it's no secret that both are in the South. And you've mentioned earlier that there's specifically 2 labs which are run by the Taliban. If you could get us more information on that, we'd appreciate that very much. And could you comment, do you think this could be done in a legal way anywhere in southern Afghanistan today?
Well, Senator, let me clear up one thing. I mentioned 2 labs. There have been many, many more over the last, I'd say, 8 to 12 months. Virtually every one of the labs now that the DEA is hitting in support of our counter-narcotics police colleagues in Afghanistan, supported by our military, Afghan Army National Commandos, at virtually every one of these things, lengthy firefights ensue. They're all being run by the Taliban. Lengthy firefights ensue. Some battles have been pitched for 2 to 3 days at these sites. For God's sakes, we're having to call in B-1 airstrikes on some of these lab complexes now. So I mean, I just want to clear that up, ma'am. There's far more than 2, and what I would recommend, and I'd be happy to work with your aides to help in any way. But I'm sure the DEA would be more than happy to come over and give you some very detailed briefings on exactly what they're finding at these sites. So.
Thank you very much. Senator?
Yeah, thank you.